Hi, my name is Dave, and today we're going to be going over the installation of the CMC Remington 700 adjustable ultra precision drop-in trigger for Remington 700 pattern rifles and aftermarket actions that allow Remington 700 style triggers to be installed. The trigger is available in two different bows, a CMC patented flat bow as shown here, as well as a more traditional curved bow. The unit is a complete drop-in assembly with everything already assembled, including the safety and the bolt stop mechanism. The brake weight is adjustable from 8 ounces to 3.5 pounds depending on your needs. From the factory it comes set at 2.5 pounds. The trigger weight is also adjustable while the trigger is installed in the rifle. The trigger has no creep and a very crisp break. Installation is pretty straightforward with only a minimal amount of tools required. However, if any part of this video does not make sense to you or you don't feel comfortable performing the installation, don't hesitate to seek the assistance of a gunsmith or armorer to assist you. Before we go over installation, let's go over the required tools and supplies needed to complete the installation. First, you will need the appropriate hex key or flathead screwdriver to remove your action screws. This depends on the chassis or stock of your rifle, as well as the original equipment. So make sure to look at the bottom of the action screws to determine the proper tool that you will need. It is also recommended that you have an inch-pound torque driver capable of tightening to the appropriate torque required for your action or chassis. Make sure to check with the manufacturer of your rifle or stock or chassis system to determine the proper torque amount. Generally it is about 40 to 65 inch-pounds. You will also need a punch and light hammer to install the trigger. This is required to punch out and back in the pins that keep the trigger in place. If you find that your pins are being particularly stubborn, some penetrating oil such as Croil can also be helpful. This is used to basically pre-lubricate the pins to allow their removal more easily. While you certainly can do the work on a flat, clean surface, I also recommend the use of a vise and soft jaws. This just works out much better to hold the work while you perform the installation process. The first step when working with any firearm is to make sure that your work surface is clear of any magazines or ammunition. Remove them if they are present. Next, we want to check and verify that the firearm is unloaded. Remove a magazine if one is present, or if you have an internal magazine, open the door to release the magazine components. Open the bolt, move to the rear, and visually inspect the magazine well and area, loading area, and chamber, and confirm that the firearm is unloaded. Next, we're going to remove the bolt. Press the bolt release, which is generally located inside the trigger guard, and pull the bolt straight back to the rear and set aside. On some aftermarket actions, there is a side release button. Now we're going to remove the action screws to separate the barreled action from the stock. I find it's easiest to turn the rifle upside down. However, if you have a scope or optic installed, you can certainly do this while it's on its side on your bench surface. Use the appropriate bit to remove the two action screws. Now you can lift out the bottom metal or trigger guard assembly depending on your rifle and set aside. Make sure to note that the action screws are different lengths, so we don't want to mix them up. The front action screw is shorter than the rear. We can now lift off the stock and set that aside. And now we have our barreled action with factory trigger present. I find that adding a small amount of penetrating oil to the pins aids in their removal. Now I'm going to secure my barreled action in the vise with soft jaws. I just find that this makes the installation process easier as it's holding the majority of the work for me so I can concentrate on just the pins, and it also provides a better angle for you to see this process. Begin by using the smaller punch to push out the front pin from left to right. I do not want to remove the pin completely. Just push out the pin enough to where the trigger can pivot outside of the pin, leaving the pin in place on the side of the action. Next, I'm going to drift out the rear pin from the opposite direction. Again, not completely removing the pin, but allowing the pin to hold the bolt stop mechanism in place. Because our new trigger assembly already includes the bolt stop installed, we can now lift out the pin by putting our finger over the spring to prevent the spring from ejecting during removal. Remove the pin, and now, holding everything in place, we can remove the existing factory trigger, spring, and bolt stop. Now we can take the new trigger assembly and put it in place, making note to line the bolt stop with the groove of the receiver, and then moving it back and forth until you see that both holes have a clear path for the pin. Once in alignment, I can hold it with my thumb while I'm giving some light strokes to the front pin just to hold everything in place. Now that the front pin has just started holding the trigger in place, I can take my rear pin and using the beveled or tipped end and put that into position and get it started. Now I can use my punch and start the rest of the installation process. I'm checking to make sure that the pin is even on both sides. Now that the rear pin is installed holding the trigger in place, we can drive back in the front pin. You can either drive it in this way, or you could remove it and then use the tipped end and install it in the same method as shown for the rear pin. It's up to you. Now quickly test the bolt stop to make sure it can move up and down. If we had that front pin installed too far, this would prevent the travel of the bolt stop. While I still have the barreled action in the vise, I like to do a quick function check now before I complete the rest of the installation or assembly process. Take the bolt and put it back into the receiver. Put it into battery. Make sure the safety is in the safe position and press the trigger. Nothing should happen. The firing pin does not move forward. Now I'm going to move it to the fire position. Test, and the firing pin does move. Now I'm going to cycle the action, and taking note that when I return the bolt into the ready position, the firing pin does not move forward. Repeat. Again, the only time that the firing pin moves forward is when I press the trigger. Put the firearm on safe, verify. Now I'm going to test to make sure that the bolt release is working. When I pull back on the bolt does not remove from the receiver until I press the bolt release. Now we can remove our barreled action from our vise, or if you were using the bench, I like to again set the barreled action upside down, retrieve your stock or chassis, and I find it's easiest to put the bottom metal in the stock first. Now I can install the stock or chassis onto the receiver, aligning the trigger in the trigger guard opening, and feeling to where the screws start to engage the action. I can now begin to tighten the action screws. But I'm not going to apply my final torque. I just want to start the screws to hold everything in place. Once the action screws are started, I can now verify that my action is aligned in my stock or chassis in the proper position, and I can put a little bit of rear pressure to make sure that the recoil lug is engaging against the stock or chassis properly. Now I can snug down, alternating between the front and rear action screws until snug. Now using my inch-pound torque driver, I can apply my final torque to my action screws. And it's important to use a torque driver to make sure that you don't over-tighten the action screws. If you do that, you can risk binding the action. So make sure you check with the manufacturer of your rifle or stock or chassis system to see what the recommended torque value is, and use the torque tool to the appropriate setting. Now we can put the bolt back into the receiver. Again, verify that there's nothing in the mag well, loading area, or chamber to verify that the firearm is unloaded, and we can perform our function checks again. With the firearm on safe and the bolt in the forward position, test to make sure that the firing pin does not move forward. Moving the selector to the fire position, we can verify that the firing pin did move forward. When we close the bolt, the firing pin does not move forward. We can verify everything is still functioning as it should. Closing the bolt again, we verified that the firing pin did not move forward. We can return the selector to the safe position and verify that the firing pin does not move forward. Last, we can also verify that the bolt stop is functioning as it should. It's not allowing the bolt to release from the receiver until it is pressed. Installation of the Remington 700 adjustable ultra precision drop-in trigger is now complete. Again, if any part of this video didn't make sense to you, or you don't feel comfortable performing the service, don't hesitate to seek the assistance of a qualified gunsmith or armorer to assist you. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.